Hello!
Hello! Welcome to No Veto Video.
This week on No Veto Video, we'll be discussing the movie Room 6. This was one of my picks, and I chose this movie for a couple of reasons. I had seen it before and thought it did some interesting things. Oh, I'm always interested in movies that play with what's real and what's not real within the universe of the movie. But also, both Catherine and I have a background in philosophy, and while I don't think existentialism is either of our preferred philosophical areas, it is still an interesting topic, especially I found this one interesting in its discussion of the nature of personal hell. It felt very much like Sartre in that regard.
Huh. So, just to back up and to catch you guys up on it if you maybe didn't get a chance to catch up with the movie, let's see, a basic plot description would be a young woman haunted by struggles from her past, upon experiencing a car accident, goes through a supernatural sort of hellscape as she sorts out what's real and what isn't.
It also, similar to the last movie we reviewed, touches on topics of isolation and people being alone and separated from others.
Wow. I really didn't get that at all. And I don't really see a sophisticated philosophical story here either. In fact, I see a very old school, very traditional religious allegory. This is a moral play that kind of plays out, and it comes down in some interesting places, but it also basically kind of confirms traditional Judeo-Christian values throughout its story.
There were a number of flaws with its implementation, but I stand by my statement that there was this existential aspect to it where people were isolated from each other. The people that they are around, they're not really connecting with.
Okay. And if the catchphrase from, the colloquial catchphrase for existentialism is that hell is other people, I suppose Room 6 is saying hell is just yourself over and over again. Of course, it's got all of the classic, horror hospital tropes that you have there, the Nurse Ratched character, you've got, unscrupulous doctors, you've got sexy vampire nurses, and...
Although that one's new for a hospital movie, I believe.
I wish I could say it was new for a hospital movie. It's got some nice turns from its lead actors, although I have to say the lead actress was for me sort of one of those, oh gosh, I know I've seen her before. Where have I seen her before? I've seen her in something. And it's like, oh right, the Brady Bunch movie. So this is the actress who played Marcia in the remake of the Brady Bunch.
She was also in The Wedding Singer as the sister.
As the sex pot sister. Interesting turn from Jerry O'Connell at what was, sort of post-Sliders time period for him.
I thought his acting was okay in this, but I think the writing for his character, or actually more precisely the direction, was not very good. It was kind of over the top in places, sort of like Lando in Empire Strikes Back.
Yes, subtlety is not what this movie does well. We often try to avoid, plot spoilers. We may, have...
There's not a whole lot of plot to spoil in this one, so...
There's not a whole lot of plot, and in order to have sort of a meaningful discussion, a meaningful response of this film, we almost need to tell you more about it. So, what it ultimately turns out, her horrible past that she's been haunted with for years and years and years turns out to be that she basically followed the treatment directives of her father. Her father who was afflicted with a terrible illness or a medical malady. had said, okay, here and no further, and she carried out his wishes. Now, she did it in a sort of really uninformed, sort of Hollywoodish kind of way. I don't think I've ever literally seen somebody pull a plug when they're pulling the plug, like I did in this movie. But, on the one hand, there is this tremendous guilt that people feel, when forced to be medical decision makers for their family members, or to carry out explicit wishes that their families have that feel wrong to them. On the other hand, like, her guilt was crazy over the top, and the premise is her guilt was so extreme that when faced with a near-death experience, that being able to let go of this guilt is what separates her from sort of a good afterlife or a bad afterlife, is very much the message of this film. Sort of like, forgive yourself and everything will be okay at the end of it. And then that's what I'm talking about, the sort of very traditional sort of understanding of guilt and sin and confession and atonement. And she has to go through this whole sort of process of reconciliation, almost like the sacrament of reconciliation. And neither of us are Catholic, but from what we understand, like, that's how it kind of works, is that, she had to fess up to what she had done. She had to confront, what she felt was her sin in that, and then ultimately sort of prove that she wasn't going to do that again, in a very bizarro sort of way. So the suggestion is to rescue her boyfriend who has a broken leg is to undo the sin of letting her father, who had a life-ending injury, have his wish fulfilled. And there's a part of me that just doesn't understand the equation that the movie's making.
Well, no, she confronted her father in his hospital room, and then stopped blaming herself for it, and almost felt like blaming her father for it instead. And I think that was
It was incredibly clunky. I mean, I can see how you see that. I see it in a totally different way. There were parts of this movie that had me crying out on the couch, like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And then, at the one point, the boyfriend has gone into this sort of mystery ghost hospital, and everything about it has me saying, like, where did they take him? Like, St. 1930s hospital? And, of course, it turns out to be fairly accurate. But, minus the sexy vampire nurses. I mean, there's ridiculousness in this film, even while there is an interesting sort of religious allegory going on underneath of it. But then ultimately, at the end of it, it seemed clear that the filmmakers and the writer didn't know kind of how to put the bow on the metaphor. Like, they were like, okay, well, now we're running out of our runtime and we need to, like, kind of wrap this up. That kind of thing.
Another thing, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, I think it was just the script needed more editing, but there was this juxtaposition between really serious moments and really absurd moments, and it didn't really feel jarring, but the police station incident, for instance, had some real absurdities to it.
Yeah, so at one point, the lead actress, or the lead character, who feels like she's beginning to go insane, goes to try and fill out a lost persons report, and yet is confronted by a very unhelpful figure of authority who also provides a pretty big hint to help her sort of unlock the mystery of the film. And so are we talking about this in the light of the twist?
I was just thinking, like, her reactions in some of the cases were a little over the top and almost humorous.
But I think if you see it, like, if you look at it from, like, retrospectively, considering the twist, then you really, it begins to fall into place. once the film ended, and the twist that I'm referring to is sort of a last minute, like at the very, very last, like literally the last minute, sort of puts the whole thing into a different kind of perspective. And I sat on the couch and I went like, oh, okay. Like, because once you have that lens change, suddenly a lot of things begin to make sense. So if it's okay, you know, if that bothers you, like, this is a good point to turn away. But it's also a movie from 2005, so perhaps you would have had a chance to see it if it was something that was going to bother you. But the realization that comes at the very, very end is that she has herself been experiencing this end-of-life vision, that she's been having a near-death experience, and that the whole thing, you know, the missing boyfriend, the psycho-crazy hospital, the confronting the stories of demons, and, you know, and even her wrestling with the trauma of her own past, that all becomes part of this end-of-life sort of vision quest that she's been on. And in that vision quest, there are sources of help and resilience, and then there are sources of shame, and sources that, like, highlight failures, and they're often the sources of shame, or the shaming forces, are all women. Now, the sources of help are a mixed bag, but there is this sort of idea of, you know, the difficult police officer, the difficult parent of her child, like
of her student,
the difficult nurses, the sexy vampire nurses are themselves even this source of shame, you know, to say, you're a horrible, blood-sucking woman just like we are. You know, that you belong here, you're part of this mess. And there's no redemption for you. That all of these, you know, and I think the cop is very much in that sort of a force, like an internal voice that we all sort of wrestle with, is the idea of, like, we need to confront these sources of shame and ultimately overcome them if we're going to get on with, you know, this act of redemption.
I disagree with you on 2 points. I don't think all of the sources of shame were women. Jerry O'Connell's character kind of feels like it, and there's a bum very near the beginning of the movie. Yeah,
and in fact he has this sort of, you know, early on in the film, I can't figure out why she's with her boyfriend, and then I definitely can't figure out why she goes on this long quest to save him.
I can't figure out why either of them are with the other person, personally.
But then there's this point where it's like, you could just replace him with me, like, and you'll hop from one bed to another, is a sort of image that they use during and it is in its own sort of way a shaming image. So you're right, yeah, the Jerry O'Connell character, first subtly and then more explicitly as the film progresses, it definitely says this, like, you know, you are among the forces of evil already, you've already committed a terrible and heinous act, and so you belong with the monsters, basically. And
one other point I disagree with, at the very beginning of the movie, she starts having premonitions before the boyfriend goes missing or anything else happens.
Yeah, an awkward, like, it's sort of like they wanted to undo all of the foreshadowing throughout the rest of the film by messing with the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
This I'm going to chalk up to substandard filmmaking.
Or maybe they changed the script part of the way through and forgot to edit that scene out. Maybe. Or maybe that scene was supposed to happen later in the movie, and for some reason they just put it in earlier.
What do you make of that student character, the little girl?
She felt like they were going for one of Stephen King's prophetic characters, but didn't hit the mark.
So like a child who sees.
Yeah. Like maybe in The Shining, or not all of the characters that I'm referring to are children, like the old woman in The Stand, or any of these prophetic characters that can see beyond what every other person around them sees.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, it's sort of like, well, who is that little girl? I guess she's been watching over me this whole time, and sort of, like, maybe she's an angel, maybe she's something else, you know. Because it didn't, it's not like I needed to spell it out for me, but because it was so unclear, there's a part of me that's like, what are you trying to say here? I don't understand. Can you tell me a little more about what it is that you're hoping I'll take away from this film? And that character especially felt sort of unformed in unhelpful ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, what are we seeing next week?
So, next week we'll be checking in, again, a movie from 2015. I guess I missed out on a lot there, but the financial crisis comedy The Big Short, starring Brad Pitt and a variety of other people. So, we'll watch that. It's available on Netflix, so if you want to catch up with that. It's another one that neither Carson nor I have seen. So we'll watch that.
Until next week.
So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.